Math 885 students, we've already discussed whole numbers, integers, fractions, and decimals. So now we're going to move on to percents, which is basically another way of writing fractions and decimals. So the word that we want to break down here is per cent, like for every cent. And the root word cent means 100. So some words that have cent in it is like there's 100 cents in a dollar, or there's 100 years in a century. So there's that root word cent. And using Roman numerals, the C stands for 100. So percent per 100 means, for every 100. So when you have a percent, 52%, it means 52 for every or per 100. 52 in the numerator, 100 in the denominator. So 52 per 100 is like a ratio of 52 to 100. One way to remember that is that the percent symbol almost looks like a fraction. Like here's the fraction bar, here's the numerator, here's the denominator. So 52 goes in the numerator, 100 goes in the denominator. So when you see something like 5%, that means 5 per 100, or 5 over 100. And this is exactly how we go about converting percents to fractions. So you write the fraction, or the percent, as a fraction with denominator 100, just like we did here, 52 over 100, 5 over 100, and then simplify the fraction. And in fact, to convert percents to decimal form, we follow this method as well. First you write it as a fraction with denominator 100, and then you write it as a decimal using place value. So let's just see up here how we would do that. 52%, write it as 52 over 100. You can simplify that fraction, or if you wanted to convert to decimal, you would write 52 ending in the hundredths place. Remember, that's the hundredths place, 2 zeros, that's 2 places after the decimal. So I would write 0.52. And 5%, writing that as a decimal, again, I would write the number 5 that ends in the hundredths place. 2 zeros, that means 2 places after the decimal. So I would put that value 5 ending in the hundredths place. Notice I need a placeholder here, so I should write a 0 there to say that I've got 0 tenths and 5 hundredths. All right, so one shortcut that we could use. Notice the number, I have 52%. A shortcut for writing that as a decimal is to imagine that there's a decimal point wherever it is in the number, but if it's a whole number, you have it here after the ones place. And percent means per 100, so you'll be dividing by 100 here. That dividing by 100 moves your decimal point 2 places to the left. So you can write same digits, just different place values, right? Same thing here with 5%. 5 over 100, imagine that you take your decimal point and move it 2 places to the left here. And you need to include a placeholder in the tenths place. So that's the shortcut for converting percents to decimal form. Just divide by 100, i.e. move the decimal point 2 places left. All right, let's see how that works in these examples. I've got these percents. Let's write these percents in fraction form and then also in decimal form. Actually, decimal form is the easiest. So here's your decimal point. Move the decimal point over 2 places. You can write that as 0.36. Now to convert it to fraction form, I would write this as 36 over 100, which can be reduced because these are 2 even numbers. So I know that 2 divides into 36 and divides into 100. 36 divided by 2 is 13. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So 36% is 0.36, or 13 over 50. Let's write 2% as a fraction and a decimal. Decimal first because it's easiest. Take that decimal point and move it 2 places over, which introduces a placeholder in the tenths place. So you can write that as 0.02. And to convert it to a fraction, write it as 2 over 100. Notice I can reduce that fraction by dividing numerator and denominator by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 100 divided by 2 is 50. And there we have it. 2% as decimal or fraction. Now 125%. This one looks weird because it has 3 digits. When normally we're used to percents being somewhere in between 0 and 100. This is bigger than that. So you take your decimal point, move it 2 places over. It's 1.25. And this should make sense because this is a percent bigger than 100%. 100% is 100 over 100, or 1. So if I convert that to a decimal, it should be a number bigger than 1. Now let's write this as a fraction. 125 over 100. See, this number ends in 5, this number ends in 0, so I know 5 goes into both numbers. And here's a tip. When you're reducing these fractions, usually if it's a whole number up here, the only factors that will go into 100 are 2 and 5. So just those are the only 2 factors you need to try when trying to reduce those fractions. So divide this by 5, divide this by 5. You get 25 over 20, and this can be reduced again. Divide by 5, divide by 5. We get 5/4. So 1.25 or 5/4. All right, let's do another example. This is a percent that that has a decimal point in it. So to convert this to decimal, again, take the decimal point, move it 2 places left. So that would be 0.245. So 24 ending in the hundredths place here, right? And then the 0.5 would be the next place over in the thousandths place. Now let's write this as a fraction with denominator 100, just completely 24.5 over 100. You just take the number and write it over 100. So now I would like to write this as a proper fraction, meaning that I don't have any decimals in here. So how do I get rid of that decimal? I want to move that decimal point to the right. So let me just multiply by 10, numerator and denominator, so that I just get rid of that decimal. So I got 245 over 1,000. All right, and now you can go and reduce this fraction. What number goes into 245 and 1,000? So I divide by 5. 245 divided by 5 is 49. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. So all right, remember that you can always check your answer by plugging these things into the calculator, right? You would do 24.5 over 100, divide by 100 to get this decimal. And you can always convert that to a fraction, and it should be 49 over 200. All right, now what about 24.5%? This one looks strange because there's a fraction in the percent. All right, so in order to convert this to fraction form, remember we want to think of this as a fraction over 100. So first, mixed numbers are really clunky for me to work with. So I will write this as an improper fraction. 2 times 24 is 48, plus 1 is 49. So I got 49 over 2, 49 halves percent. And so now I could write that as 49 over 2. And then you could say over 100. But what I mean by over is really divide. And how do you divide, 49 over 2 divided by 100? And remember, to divide with fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So this will be really 49 over 2 times 1 over 100. So 100 is in the denominator. All right, so this could be written as 49 over 200. And there we have it. And now, in order to convert to decimal form, this one looks a little clunky because it doesn't have a denominator of 100, but we know what we could do is take the numerator, 49, divide by the denominator of 200. And in order to make this calculation easy for me, just because I have 2 zeros there, I could move the decimal point over 2 places here. Same thing here. Move that decimal point over 2 places in both the numerator and denominator to make this really 0.49 divide by 2. And line up my decimal. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract. Bring down. 2 goes into 9 4 times. 4 times 2 is 8. Subtract. And then bring down the next digit, which will be a 0 there. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. Now I've got remainder 0. So you could write it as 49 over 200 or 0.24.